The Falcons are going to have to overcome some injuries on their offensive line.
I think the New Orleans Saints are going to be the ones having to overcome some injuries on their offensive line.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to a Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Falcons and Locked On Saints podcast. And of course, Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So, guys, if you're tuning in for the first time and you don't know who this person is just talking to you, I am, of course, Aaron Freeman, the humble host of the Locked On Falcons podcast. And the person who has joined me is Ross Jackson, the not so humble host of the new Locked On Saints podcast. But we are, of course, covering your favorite teams and your most hated team every day here on this podcast. And we thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of both of our podcasts. And if you want to become an everydayer and make these pods your first listen of the day, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, Ross, we are back for another illustrious hate week here on the Locked On Falcons and Locked On Saints podcast. We're going to be previewing this week 4 matchup. Saints traveling to Atlanta to, battle it out for NFC South supremacy. And, the teams aren't too cordial, but you and I, we're doing it right.
We're pretty cordial. Yeah, so we're pretty cordial. We'll take a shot every now and then. Yeah, we have fun,
Yeah. How you doing on the, before we get into taking shots at each other, how you doing today, Ross? On this
I'm good, man. I'm ready to get started. I love it. Hope you're doing well.
All right. So let's jump right into it. As a humble, cordial host of this podcast, I will let you get the floor first to talk about the New Orleans Saints. And so what's going on in New Orleans? What are the biggest stories heading into this week 4 matchup?
Yeah, look, this should sound familiar, Aaron. I think the biggest thing for the New Orleans Saints, particularly over on the offensive side, which is where I'll start here, is that they don't have their starting center, Erik McCoy, for at least the next 4 weeks, with the expectation being 6 to 8 weeks. Suffered a groin injury against the Philadelphia Eagles in their week 3 loss to the Eagles just last weekend. And he's going to have surgery. And he's out. And that's going to be a big deal for New Orleans because that offensive line struggled a lot without him once he was out up against the Philadelphia Eagles. But now the Saints have a week to prepare to see if they're able to train somebody up to get ready to go at center. But as you know, anytime that you lose a center on your offensive line, it has major ripple effects. And the Saints got a really bad taste of that last week against the Philadelphia Eagles.
So I'm curious, Ross, who's going to step in? I think Lucas Patrick stepped in last week.
Yep.
I know Cesar Ruiz has some experience playing that position, but I understand he might be going through his injuries of his own. So is it going to be Lucas Patrick kicking over from left guard to center?
I think it's all going to come down to whether or not right guard Cesar Ruiz is available. Cesar left the game for one play against Philly with an ankle injury, but this week ended up missing practice on Wednesday with a knee injury. So it's a different situation that he's dealing with. Now, that was the Wednesday injury report. As you know, a lot can change from Wednesday to Thursday, from Thursday to Friday. So we'll see what happens. But if Cesar Ruiz is good to go, then I would expect that, yes, Lucas Patrick kicks inside to center. And then you might see one of the other veteran backups end up plugging in at left guard. That could be veteran Oliudo. That could be longtime Saint Landon Young. Or that could be second year, 4th round draft pick from New Orleans, Nick Saldiveri. We'll see which one of those guys that it is. But where it gets really complicated is if Cesar Ruiz ends up also being out, then the Saints are going to have to not only replace a center, but also replace each of their left guard spots. So in that case, it might be wise to leave Lucas Patrick at left guard, maybe plug in Oliudo, Landon Young, Nick Saldiveri, whomever at right guard, and then actually move Shane Lemieux, who they moved up from, former New York Giant, former Oregon Duck, if I remember correctly, before that. So very experienced in the wide zone run system and all those things. Not a lot of experience in the NFL at center, but the Saints have worked him out there over the course of training camp and preseason. So he could potentially be moved in at center. If Ruiz also misses, that's where things can get a little bit complicated for New Orleans.
So is it fair to ask that I've made a lot of fun on Trevor Penning's expense on Locked On Falcons over the years? Is it fair to ask that the Saints may be potentially down their two best offensive linemen if both Ruiz and McCoy? How do you feel about the rest of the starting three, I guess you could say, elsewhere?
Yeah, I would say that they're probably down in this case. I would say maybe two of their four best, right? Because like I have to put Trevor Penning sort of in his own conversation. But look, rookie left tackle Taliesin Fuang has been fantastic. And really, Erik McCoy and Lucas Patrick, they for a little while were the highest graded offensive linemen according to Pro Football Focus. Now, that all depends upon how much weight you put into Pro Football Focus. But so I don't know if I would say they're two best, because Lucas Patrick has kind of been that second best guy. But Cesar Ruiz kind of hovers there as either the third or fourth best guy, even though I do have some trouble putting him up above Taliesin Fuang, or the rookie starting at left tackle. So I think the biggest thing, though, is that without a doubt, they're without their best offensive lineman in Erik McCoy.
So, Ross, let's flip the script to the defensive side of the ball. What's sort of the big issue that the Saints are dealing with this week, heading into this Week 4 matchup?
Much like the injury on the offensive line hangs in the balance, or makes the run game hang in the balance for the offense, which is where everything is predicated from with this New Orleans Saints wide zone offense, which you're familiar with over in Atlanta, of course, how important that run game is. The Saints also struggled big time against the run, up against the Philadelphia Eagles, particularly late in the game. Now, the offense didn't stay on the field a ton. The defense was maybe winded, all these other things you might want to throw out there. But nonetheless, they just didn't hold up in the run game. 147 rushing yards surrendered to Saquon Barkley. Bijan Robinson is licking his chops looking at that and getting ready for this New Orleans Saints defense. Now, the Saints run defense was really, really good the first 2 weeks, because teams had to abandon the run game because of how effective their offense was, scoring 91 points, the second most in NFL history, tied for the second most in NFL history over the course of the first 2 games. So if the Saints offense gets back to clicking, which will be tough without that offensive line healthy, then that's where I think the run game gets aided. But if this ends up being a close game between New Orleans and Atlanta, just like it was between New Orleans and Philadelphia, Atlanta's run game could be the thing that ends up being the difference in this game. So the Saints run defense has to be the big question mark.
Well, it is fascinating talking with you, Ross, because are you talking about the Saints or are you talking about the Falcons? Because
I know, right?
A lot of the same issues that you're talking about, Saquon Barkley running all over you. Are you talking about the Saints or are you talking about the Falcons? I'm so confused here. But curious about the rest of the Saints defense. Is this, outside of that maybe porous run defense, does this feel like a typical Dennis Allen led defense through 3 games at this point in the season?
I would say absolutely yes. I think that they've given up some explosive plays because of lack of tackling and things like that, running into each other. But we've seen that from this Dennis Allen defense before too. That's kind of been the moments where they struggle, or the moments where things are just completely out of sync for them. That's what we saw against Philly. We've seen that in other games as well. But on a more consistent basis, this is still very much a Dennis Allen defense. Even last week when they struggled, they still took the ball away multiple times. They had the punt block, which is something that the Saints have done twice now this season already, and everything. And so I think that that is, and of course is a historied part of this rivalry between the Saints and the Falcons, is blocking punts. And so I think that those things are still things. Sorry, it's relevant, right? We got to tell a little story. It's editorial. It's editorial.
My mind went to that game, and I was just like, I will never escape that game ever in my life.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Continue.
I'm sorry. It's editorial responsibility.
I went to a dark place.
Come back. Come to the light. So I would say that the Dennis Allen defense is still very much a Dennis Allen defense, especially when it comes to the passing game and stuff like that. Some of that's going to be clouded by some of the explosive plays they've given up so far this season. But for the most part, they're picking passes off, they're forcing turnovers, they're not allowing red zone scores, things like that. Those are the things that you typically want to see from a Dennis Allen defense, and we've seen that so far this year for the majority of their performance.
Okay. Well, we're going to continue this conversation talking about the big stories for the Atlanta Falcons. And don't worry, guys. It's not that your podcast has skipped a beat and it's repeating the same narratives, but it's a lot of similar issues, and that the Falcons will have to overcome with injuries on their front and being able to stop the run. And we'll get into all of that as we continue today's Crossover Thursday. Guys, if you're looking to get back into the stadium, especially Mercedes-Benz Stadium this weekend, you got to check out Gametime, because they are taking out the guesswork in buying tickets. Whether you're looking for football tickets, whether you're a baseball fan, looking at other sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, Gametime is there to help you out. And they take the guesswork out because, what you see is what you get. I love their panoramic seat view, so you can pick that perfect spot so that you can see, whether Bijan Robinson sprinting down the sideline or Chris Olave, whoever you're into, you can find that on Gametime with those panoramic seat views. And if you toggle on the all-in prices, you don't have to worry about getting hit with hidden fees at checkout. It's all there for you on the Gametime app. All you got to do is download the Gametime app and create an account. And when you do, use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. So continuing today's crossover Thursday here with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints and myself, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons. And of course, we're talking about this big Week 4 matchup between the Falcons and Saints. But if you want to find out about all the other matchups going on elsewhere in the NFL, make sure you check out Locked On NFL. They got you covered with 2 shows daily, giving you all the biggest stories around the NFL. But let's get into the biggest stories for the Atlanta Falcons. And Ross, it's going to be repeat. It's just a slightly different flavor.
So interesting. Yeah, it's so funny.
The Saints are dealing with, but it's being the big question for me going into this, and the biggest story for the offense is, can they essentially establish the run given some of the injuries they're dealing with on their offensive line? They're down their starting center, Drew Dalman, on an IR with a high ankle sprain as opposed to a groin injury. And their right tackle, Kaleb McGary, is not officially listed as out for this upcoming game. He's officially day-to-day dealing with an MCL sprain, but I would be utterly shocked if he played this weekend. He had an MCL injury last year and missed 3 games. Now, maybe the severity is slightly different, and so this one he can come back, in a shorter timetable than that. But I would be floored if he plays this week. And so you're losing a big potential part of your run game in terms of McGary. Him and Chris Lindstrom on the right side of that offensive line make it go. The Falcons will be placing Dalman with Ryan Nuzul, who's been around the last couple of years, been solid at times when he's been forced to step on the field, but is not the same player as Drew Dalman. And the same thing with Storm Norton, who did a solid job as a replacement for McGary last year, but is not bringing the same sort of oomph in the run game, especially in the outside zone scheme that the Falcons love to run, just like the New Orleans Saints. And so the question is going to be, can the Falcons be as committed to that run scheme against the Saints this week if they don't necessarily have the horses to run it? And if they can't be as committed, can they diversify their run games, mix in some inside zone, some other run things? Can they supplement the run game with the quick passing game, right? Where it's essentially the idea of, hey, if you're trying to get 5 or 6 yards on the ground, who cares if it's a pass or a run play? As long as you get 5 or 6 yards, you can still keep the offense on schedule. But, that may involve screens and swings and all various things on the perimeter. But can you do that effectively against a Saints defense that has big physical corners that love to play press coverage? The Falcons struggled with that last week against the Chiefs in the second half of the game, trying to dial up some of those plays to Darnell Mooney and Bijan Robinson. And the Chiefs were able to blow up those plays because they weren't necessarily getting the blocking on the edge. And that's going to be a challenge for the Falcons going into this week. So can the Falcons run the football? And if they can't run the football, can they find other ways to keep this offense on schedule and keep them in manageable situations so that their third down woes that have made them like bottom 3 in the NFL in terms of converting third downs doesn't rear its ugly head against this Saints defense and them not being able to sustain drives and be able to put points on the board. So that's the big story for the Falcons offense this week.
Yeah, for sure. It does sound very, very familiar. It sounds almost the exact same in terms of what New Orleans is dealing with. I think that you're looking at the same thing in terms of like trying to use the short passing game as an extension of the run game and the way that all ends up working out. How do you feel this, I guess my question is like, how do you feel about replacing a center when you also have a new quarterback in the building at the same time? I mean, it's Kirk Cousins. He's been doing it for a long time. There's nothing he hasn't seen. So at least there's that. But do you feel like that complicates the issue at all to where you have like a new quarterback with a new offensive system and now down the center for the team?
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. Like in the Chiefs game, once the Chiefs saw that the Falcon center was out, they started dialing up pressure. And that created problems They were able to get some of that pressure through the A gap and disrupt the offense, and that forced the Falcons to do the thing that they don't really want to do, which is keep Bijan Robinson in to protect. And if he's blocking, he can't catch the football. And so they're going to have to, if that's going to be the case, I wouldn't expect the Saints to do anything different. Like, hey, we're for the Chiefs. Why not we do the same thing and see if it works? So I think that's going to be their biggest challenge. Can they handle those extra rushers up the middle more so than anything with a backup center who doesn't have maybe the experience of a Drew Dahlman or a Kirk Cousins to make those line protections and calls at the line of scrimmage?
Yeah, for sure. And that's gonna be a great matchup to watch, is that Falcons interior offense, the Saints interior defense. Saints interior defense has struggled a little bit in the run game, but in terms of generating pressure, they've been pretty solid. And really the Saints have done a good job at ticking up pressure on the pass rush side. Carl Granderson and Chase Young have kind of taken over as the two primary pass rushers, with Cam Jordan's kind of seeing his snaps tick back a little bit. He's helping out on the interior a bit as well. But those two guys are both at 18 pressures generated so far. So they're both tied for the most, third most pressures by individual players right now in the NFL. And then Brian Brzee, the second-year defensive tackle, he's coming off of a 2-sack game. He's been really disruptive so far this season. And the Saints may be getting defensive tackle Colin Saunders back as well, veteran who used to play with the Kansas City Chiefs. So this could end up lining up to being one of those situations where, while Atlanta's offensive line, much like New Orleans' offensive line, is losing in terms of health, the Saints' defensive line is coming in with a little bit extra oomph, if you will, going into this week.
Yeah, and I've watched a couple of Saints games at this point, and I know Demario Davis isn't wreaking the same usual havoc he usually wreaks as a blitzer, but he's had so much success against the Falcons, so it wouldn't shock me if this is necessarily his breakout game to sort of be that guy that can blow up Bijan in the backfield and whatnot.
Yeah, big player to watch too. Also on the injury report on Wednesday, as it did not participate, player dealing with, I believe it's a hamstring injury, if I remember correctly. He went into the injury tent super late in the game. We thought maybe he was just getting something taped up, but definitely a big one to watch with him not participating. But I will say this, he's probably going to be on the field. This is a guy that's very hard to keep off the field. But like, if he's on the field and hampered, that's going to be a different story. So a big one to watch there for sure.
Yeah. Last tidbit before we talk about the Falcons defense, I do wonder a little bit about whether or not Kyle Pitts is going to have a big game. He had a big catch last week, but we went into this Chiefs game being like, hey, the Chiefs have given up more catches and more yards to tight ends than pretty much any team. And Kyle Pitts, outside of really that one play, wasn't a huge contributor. Obviously, the Saints are coming off a game where Dallas Goedert kind of cooked them in that game. And so we're sitting here wondering with the Falcons, like, okay, well, last week wasn't the big Kyle Pitts breakout game. Maybe it's this week. So what are your thoughts on the Saints' ability to deal with someone like Kyle Pitts?
Yeah, look, it's going to be a challenge. I mean, look, they just gave up 170 receiving yards to Dallas Goedert, and 61 of them came all on one play. But still, that's a lot to end up giving up in terms of what you're trying to do there. And the Saints had recently gotten better up against tight ends over the course of the past couple of years. But this year so far, they've given up the third most yards, 217. You're just two spots behind those Kansas City Chiefs that you mentioned, two tight ends. So they kind of taken maybe a little bit of a step back in that here early on in the season. But it took, three guys running into one another. The team only gave up, let me see where they were last year. They were 833. So around the middle of the NFL last year, in terms of receiving yards surrendered to opposing tight ends. So if they're able to kind of get back to what they already have proven to be, then I think that they'll be okay. But I think Kyle Pitts is going to be a big test for them to get there.
Yeah. So when we talk about the Falcons defense, very similar to what's going on with the Saints, can they stop the run, right? The Saints have one game where they had to worry about the run defense. The Falcons have had every game where they've had to worry about their run defense. Everybody's been pretty successful running the football, but especially these last 2 weeks against Philadelphia, against Kansas City, basically what those teams did is they forced the Falcons to play a lot of nickel with three wide receivers, and they just kind of ran it down their throats. And I wonder if the Saints are going to try to repeat that. They tried that last week, seemingly against Philadelphia, because the Falcons had so much success doing that against the Eagles defense. So it looked like the Saints were playing a lot more with those three wide receiver sets and trying to run the football. And it didn't quite work, because I think Philadelphia, they probably listened to the Locked On Falcons podcast where I made fun of their scheme and saying that they're too soft up front. They don't have enough up front. And they put more beef up front last week, and they were able to shut down the Saints run game And so I wonder if the Falcons will make a similar adjustment to put more beef on the football field to try to stop this Saints run game, given some of the issues that they're dealing with at that position. Or do the Saints just go back to, hey, we're going to go back to what we like to do, which is put the fullback out there, put the multiple tight ends, and we'll run the football. We'll, use play action as potent as it was against that Dallas Cowboys team. I kind of like that strategy a little bit better for the Falcons defense, even though it may play to the same strength, just because I think it also plays to the strength of the Falcons, where you can get more bigger bodies out there, be a little bit stouter against the run, and maybe get more Grady Jarrett, more David Onyemata, some of these other interior D linemen against some of these question marks on the Saints offensive line. But there is a give and take there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Saints ran nine times out of 11 personnel last week, out of the 20, I believe it was 29 total rushes that they had. And they only got 3.9 yards per carry out of those. So even when they went to that, and look, Aaron, all those came after Erik McCoy had his injury. 5 of those 9 runs all happened in the second half of the game, all this other stuff. So it just wasn't working for them, even when they tried to go lighter. So it was tough for them when they went heavy. Philly stacked the defensive line with 6 players and 1 hovering linebacker over the top. That took away a lot of the double teams that New Orleans was able to do on those outside runs. You know how important those double teams are in those outside zone runs. And so they were having a lot of trouble doing that. And then they weren't able to run an 11. Like it was a big deal for them. And so the question mark becomes, how much of it was that Philly specifically had a great day, especially with the awesome day that their big defensive tackle had, or is it that the Saints weren't able to protect the run because of their own deficiencies? And so Atlanta is going to be a big sort of education in which one of those is the correct issue.
Okay. And I'm curious, what are some of the other things that you're looking at with this Saints offense going up against this Falcons defense this week?
I think one of the big things is going to be those 2 safeties. I mean, Justin Simmons, who, of course, the Saints also pursued, as well as Jesse Bates, 2 of the best safeties in the NFL, one of the best safety tandems in the NFL. Plus, you've got A.J. Terrell on the outside there, like very, very good secondary. And that's being coached by very, very good coaches that get very, very good play out of the secondary. So I think that's going to be the other thing is, look, New Orleans is going to want to run the football for sure, but they also need to be able to throw, right? It's going to be a big piece of it. And so are they going to be able to match up against this Atlanta secondary that's got a lot of talent? I think that the Saints have a lot of talent at wide receiver as well. I just think that it's good on good. You know what I mean? And that's where we get to see some really fun and good football, I would say.
Absolutely. So we will see which team shows up and has the good football, but we'll break down some things on what we think are like the 3 things that can allow them to play that good football this Sunday as we wrap up today's crossover Thursday. Now, NFL fans, you can start the NFL season with a big return at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you have a hunch during the middle of the game, whatever that is, you can head on over to FanDuel and take advantage of that hunch, and you can go to the same places that you go to check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play. It's all there for you on the same page that you place your bets. And when you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Guaranteed means win or lose, man. You just throw $5 out there. FanDuel's going to give you $200 in bonus bets to continue until your heart's content. It's all there for you at FanDuel.com. And when you go check out the line for the Week 4 Saints-Falcons matchup, where the Falcons are now favored by 2.5 points. That line moved from 1.5 in the Falcons' favors to 2.5, probably due to some of the injuries that the Saints are dealing with. Falcons, of course, are dealing with their own injuries. And you can also check out, if you're a college football fan, hey, who's going to win the national title? Hey, Georgia's odds are great. I had to keep scrolling down the FanDuel Sportsbook to find LSU's odds, but hey, maybe you're feeling like LSU has a chance to win the national title. And I think Georgia's plus 400, so 4-1, and LSU's plus 6,000, so 60-1. So, it's a little different in the football in the state of Georgia versus in the state of Louisiana. But hey, you can check it out at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Aaron Freeman here of Locked On Falcons, Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints here for a crossover Thursday, which is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL, and you can win $50 instantly when you play $5. So, Ross, we are talking about the things that these teams have to do in order to win football games, also known as keys to victory. And what are 3 that you think the New Orleans Saints have to do this Sunday to emerge with a win?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is find a way to run the football. And a good way to do that is to get Taysom Hill involved a bunch. Taysom has been the kind of Falcons kryptonite and everything at times. He should be back and healthy. So I think that he has to play a big role in getting that run game going. They're gonna have to you're gonna have to get after Kirk Cousins with the pass rush as well. Keep him uncomfortable. Keep him making some bad decisions or force him into making some bad decisions if they can. And then lastly, number 3 for me is generate explosive plays on offense, while of course limiting them on defense. New Orleans has done a good job of both of those things. In some cases, when they haven't, that's when they've lost.
Yeah, for me, the Falcons, it's the first thing is someone's got to control the line of scrimmage in this game, and hopefully it's the Atlanta Falcons that do that on either side of the ball with establishing a run, stopping the run game, and making one of these teams play in a way left-handed that they don't want to necessarily play. And then the second thing to me is don't be a bozo, referring to Kirk Cousins, right? Don't turn the ball over. Don't do the bozo stuff that Kirk Cousins, the chaos that Kirk Cousins occasionally has in this matchup. And then the third thing is I want to see if this coaching staff can make the adjustments to get better play in some of these areas of deficiency that we discussed on today's episode. But
that's Ross, a great call.
Kicking it back to you. I was hoping that we would go entire crossover Thursday episode without the Taysom Hill name being dropped on the podcast. And unfortunately, we had to do it. But what is Taysom Hill's role in the Saints' new look offense under Klint Kubiak? What are you expecting from him this weekend?
Can I answer the question about what his role is by simply saying yes? That's kind of what his role has been so far this season. He'll take snaps at running back. He'll take snaps at fullback, tight end, wide receiver, in the slot, quarterback. Like they'll just fold him in everywhere. And then he's on both kick and punt return and coverage units as well. They missed him last week up against the Philadelphia Eagles. That would have been a massive help, especially after losing Erik McCoy, to just have that extra juice in the run game in terms of what it is that he's able to provide. Look, Alvin Kamara missed Wednesday's practice with a hip/ribs injury. I think he'll probably be fine by the time that the actual weekend rolls around, but just a big one to watch. And if he's hampered in any way, or if he's not able to go, it's not only Jamal Williams, the backup running back, that ends up being called upon. It's Taysom Hill that's going to be called upon in that run game. So I would expect him to be somebody that ends up getting the ball quite often from a variety of different ways. But I expect that it's mostly going to be his involvement would mostly be in the run game, although he still has the option to go out there and run, or not the option, but is still called upon to go out there and run routes and things like that as well. Yeah.
And, on that third key to victory that I suggested about making adjustments, basically what I mean.
Such a good one, by the way.
Is, my worry with the Atlanta Falcons is that, they're going to be this team that is we're going to run what we're going to run, and it's up to our opponent to stop us. And I would like to see the team do things differently, right? It's the idea of like, if you're a team and you do A, B, and C well, and then, injuries take away B, and then you're playing an opponent that can also take away C, can you make that adjustment? And just instead of just relying on doing A well, you can also now add D and E and F to your repertoire. And I think if the Falcons can show that they can do that, given some of the concerns we have with the run game, and not being able to rely as much on the outside zone scheme, with their ability to stop the run, that to me is going to be a big key to not only their success on Sunday, but throughout the rest of the season, because that's going to be something that you're going to need to do as the season wears on, because attrition and injuries and all these various things and different matchups are going to affect you. And I think for me, that's the one lingering question I have with this new Falcons coaching staff on how good are they at making some of these adjustments, because in both of their losses to the Pittsburgh Steelers and Kansas City Chiefs, it felt like both of those teams, especially those defenses, kind of figured out what the Falcons were doing midway through the game, and the Falcons really weren't able to kind of make those in-game adjustments to figure something out to sort of counter what those defenses were doing. So I think that's going to be important this week, especially going up against another very good defense under a very good defensive coordinator in head coach in Dennis Allen.
Yeah, it's funny. This is now the moment where a lot of Saints fans that are listening go, wait, is he talking about the Falcons or is he talking about the Saints? Because like this is one of those things that happens when you get into sort of the business of the wide zone offense. And both of these teams dealt in that sort of, black market over the course of this offseason, and getting Zach Robinson over in Atlanta, having Klint Kubiak here in New Orleans. There's a lot of that mentality of just going to run what they run and win with it. And that's going to be the idea. And I think Saints fans kind of got introduced to that a little bit last week, to where, they were running what they were running, it wasn't working. Then they ran what they typically run, but they ran it out of something else and it still didn't work. And they didn't really have another avenue to go to. And then the big question mark became, is that an inability to adjust, an unwillingness to adjust, which is very common around the NFL. I wish that people really realize how common that is, that most teams go in and say, this is the identity, we're not changing, and don't really make those big wide swath change of direction adjustments. They make sort of smaller tweaks and things like that throughout a game. But we saw that with New Orleans. And so the big question was it injury driven, or was it like this is sort of part of what it is to have a wide zone offense? And so it's going to be really interesting to see both of these teams potentially end up in that same situation again this week, to where one of them will have to adjust. Who adjusts best might be the one that ends up walking away with the victory.
Yeah, definitely. Ross, I think that's where we can kind of end this crossover Thursday. Anything you want to add to the folks? Trade some barbs to close out. We've been maybe a little too cordial on today's episode.
25 points. I don't know. I mean, what are we supposed? What are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
We'll let them do the rivalry. Just hopefully, like nobody ends up apologizing for the rivalry this time.
Absolutely. I know. My listeners are upset that I gave you the floor for that, but I just felt like there's got to be something to get the people fired up.
Rivalry week, hate week. Yeah, rah.
Yeah. So
you could throw a shot back. You could throw a bar back if you want.
No, I'll take the high road.
Oh, you're gonna walk? Okay, so you're just gonna set me up, and then you're gonna pretend like you're the better person in the situation. All right, fine. I'll take my lick. I'll take that L.
Guys, that is going to do it for us here on Crossover Thursday. Myself, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. Get ready to trade those barbs in Atlanta on Sunday. We will, of course, continue to have it covered on both respective shows daily in the lead up to this matchup. Of course, hatefully throwing shots at every team.
I'm not sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not sorry.
So make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons and Locked On Saints your first listen on subscribe. I can't talk. Can't subscribe. I'm so angry. Subscribe to it on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's all there for you. Check out Locked On NFL if you want to get what's going on around the rest of the league. That's it for you guys. We're done here. Continue to watch Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.